Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Record Breakers. I am PETEY RAVE, your man window plan. Here with me is, of course, my team, my crew of record reviewers. We have none other than Brett.
Want a goose?
Mm-hmm. We got Drew.
Not really.
And we've got Patrick. We've got Patrick.
Perhaps some Guinness?
Mm-hmm.
The nectar of the gods?
Mm-hmm. In fact, Drew will just simply have a mellow yellow. Yes. All right, so we're gathered to talk about music, of course, and here to provide us the music this week is none other than Patrick. Patrick, what do you got for us this week?
So many episodes ago, we talked about a band called Hüsker Dü, and they're awesome, and I think we all mostly like them. The guitar player and sort of lead singer of that band is a guy named Bob Mould, who has been around since 79 was the beginning of Hüsker Dü, and he is 54 years old and still making music now. And I wanted to take something from sort of his recent career. He's been playing ever since, and we're doing his album Silver Age.
Mm-hmm. Brett, I'm curious, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Well, I had no clue. If he would have planted me down and said, we're going to listen to Bob Mould, and I wouldn't have put two and two together without looking at him. I was like, oh, yeah, it's that guy, because I looked up Hüsker Dü not long ago. But no, I really had no clue what I was getting into. When you read the title of the album and you guess about how old the guy is, you can sort of be like, oh, I think I'm going to get a tale from a wise old man. He's going to give me a stern talking to in rock and roll form.
Yes. Drew, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
I had really none. Usually I tend to, when there's the solo projects from the band that I respect, I tend to stay away. So he was like, oh, this is the guy from Hüsker Dü. And I was like, oh, well, then I definitely didn't listen to this. So I was coming into it like Brett was, which is completely fresh and absolutely zero idea.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, how would you describe the themes and elements that make up this record?
After Hüsker Dü, Bob Mould he basically packed up his Ibanez Flying V, went out and bought a Stratocaster, and decided to just start fresh and make something different. This is, as far as I can tell, if alternative rock had not been co-opted by the super radio friendly bands like Bush and Weezer and all that sort of vaguely grunge stuff, this is kind of where it would have went. It's rock music, but you can sing along to it. It's just enough pop. And what I love about Bob Mould and kind of carries through this record. So this album came out when he was 52. And he still carries all the same passion and energy and, to some extent, anger he had when he was, 20 years old with Hüsker Dü, 30 some years ago. And that kind of carries into this. He still knows how to write a good song. He's still making music, and he's not just quieting down and slipping into old age. He is continuing to kick and scream, like he has been forever. And I think this album was kind of I don't want to call it a comeback because he never stopped, but this was a return to
years.
Yeah, because he never went away. I mean, he's released albums pretty much every 3 or 4 years forever. But he did a couple of electronic records just because he was fucking around with something new. And this was sort of him going back to his rock and roll roots. It probably is the closest thing he's done to Sugar since then. Also, go listen to Sugar. They're fantastic too. That was one of his other bands that was sort of a solo project. But I really, brought this in because I think it is proof that you can be 50 some years old and still be a fucking rock and roll guy, mm-hmm. and not just turn into some old, nostalgia act.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what would be the themes and elements that caught your attention? Did you agree?
Well, I'll just let my words speak for themselves. This is some USDA grade A choice old fart rocker album. It's a mature taste that sells heavily on the name, that's on the cover, but what it lacks otherwise, and the hard edge of the old days, it makes up with the polish of somebody who spent their life making music. I mean, this guy's put out 1 million fucking albums. There are some songs that hit the simple punk and alt rock progressions. You can sort of pick them out. But they do have a real personalized edge on them. They don't sound necessarily like a cookie cutter, but they do have they are still a cookie, I guess. But it also has some tracks that give you the sing-song stories of an old rocker, which is what you would expect at this time in the guy's age. In the songs that he sings about are about the industry itself in some parts. So, it sort of fits the bill.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be the themes and elements that caught your attention?
Well, like I said before, I don't usually dive headfirst in the solo stuff, and usually that's because I don't want to worry myself with thinking about, well, maybe it's not as good, and maybe that'll taint my opinion of the band that I do know and do respect. But like this, I dove into and actually kind of enjoyed. Brett's right; it is a little bit more matured than obviously his earlier stuff, and that comes from maturity. Oddly enough, it felt very like 90s to me. It felt very 90s alt rock to me, which is not a bad thing. It was a cool feel to it. I liked it for that, but it definitely felt like you could put this on the local alt rock station here in Ohio, 88.9 in the 90s, and it would not miss a beat like at all. And that's kind of cool to me. It was very well done, very well polished. There's some nitpicky things I could go into in the mixing that I would have liked to see, but that's me being nitpicky about that. But it was really, really well done, really, really well polished. The one thing was that I think that the composition could have been a little more intriguing. It felt like I sort of was getting the beats that I was expecting to get partway through the album, and it didn't really deviate from that. But it was really solid. It had good hooks to it. It had catchy parts to it. It had cool parts that I could see myself singing along to at a show, but it never deviated from what I was expecting. So.
Yeah. Patrick, what would be some of the key tracks for you? Some of the tracks that you would zero in on?
So I'm not going to do the Record Breakers thing. I'm going to go to the second song and title track, Silver Age, which I think is thematically the song of this album. It's as Brett said, it's a guy in his 50s talking about, his place in rock music. And it to me is, I think it was mentioned last week about title tracks have to kind of, if you're going to put a song that is the same title as the album, it better be a good one. And I feel like this lives up to being a title track. The whole song's sort of about being an old punk, but not slipping into complacency and being old. I mean, the line "never too old to contain my rage," the Silver Age, just sort of that whole attitude is what this album is, not simply slipping off into being old and boring. The Descent is sort of another really good, Bob Mould song, I guess is the only way to describe it. It has a nice little guitar solo bit in it. And it's, what I like about his stuff after Hüsker Dü is it's a lot easier to listen to than Hüsker Dü. It's a lot less, brutal, crazy, experimental. It's poppier, but it never feels like disingenuous. And then one towards the end, Keep Believing, is sort of as close to a Sugar song as has come out in 20 years. I mean, it feels like that. Sugar was always had like this really nice sort of sparkle to it, but it was always still kind of had a hard, edge to it because it came from a guy who, grew up playing punk music. Mm-hmm. But those three are my favorites, but I think they're all pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what would be some of the key tracks that you would zero in on?
I would start with Keep Believing. This song could have sounded a lot different if the drums were subdued and they slowed the strumming down. I think they made the right choice to really punch it up, because this album does sort of, waxes and wanes with how punchy it gets. And the opening track, Star Machine, I couldn't believe that this was a 2012 album. It sounds sort of like a subdued Pennywise track with some strange vocal effects. It comes complete with your punk rock sloppy solo that you can barely hear through the mix. But it has sort of this like that anti-war era, like Bad Religion sound, but obviously the vocals were completely Bob Mould. And like throughout the entire album, I was feeling a lot of 1990s, not even alt rock, just rock, like Tom Petty rock type sounds for like Last Dance with Mary Jane type. Like it was kind of strange, but like it's hard to pick things out because these songs were fairly simple, but very stylized. But the amount of depth that is in the difference of the songs, made it so that there were a couple songs that really stood out as being different. You'll run into them, but Angels Rearrange, or Angles, sorry. Yeah, that was the most Tom Petty sounding track on the album. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what Drew has to say, because he is the one that invoked the 90s.
Yes. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Sorry, I invoked the 90s. I don't know what that... Like, are we going to watch Clueless later? I'm really lost. We'll start with Star Machine for me. I'm always the one that harps on the first song should sort of, if it's not like an intro or something silly like that, it should give you an idea of what you're going to get into. And I think that this track does it well. It has a simple, driving, sort of thick intro that carries it through the rest of the song. It gets you comfortable, and it's just a simple hook that just pushes you in and is like, okay, this is what you're going to get. It's not going to be overwrought with ridiculousness. It's going to be a simple record, but you're going to get some substance to it, which I appreciate. The Descent. I'm a sucker for a happy sounding song with a melancholy message. It's the reason I listen to Real Big Fish. Although most of theirs is anger and depression, but that's besides the point. It's just something that is kind of cool to me, the juxtaposition of the lyrics and the music. You can sing along with a smile, but if you actually dive into the lyrics, it's not exactly that cheery. Unlike the ending, First Time Joy. The reason I liked First Time Joy, it sort of was the slower sort of way to end the record. It sort of left you trailing off a little bit, and I think that's kind of cool. A really good note, and the whole song sort of felt uplifting, not only in the lyrics but in the music as well. And it was just something I think was kind of good, a good choice when you have songs throughout that are sort of deeper in subject matter, things like Silver Age, things like Star Machine, stuff like that, as far as lyrics go. Ending on something like First Time Joy that doesn't leave you being depressed on the record, I think is a good plan all around.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Yeah, and some good choices, some good tracks. Going back around the horn, Brett, what would be your conclusion about the album overall?
This is an album that tries to make a lot of different approaches at making a deep and meaningful album. But for me, it really didn't hit that hard. There's just not enough to differentiate this album musically from other aging hardcore rockers that go off on their solo career. Seeing that I really wasn't hip on Hüsker Dü, I didn't really have any strong nostalgia to push me into, liking it for the nostalgia value. But if you want a small release alt rock album, by all means, go try this out. I could just be burnt out because I've heard too many solo act of once great bands that sort of are still harping on the system, even though the system kind of crumbled.
Yeah.
But
Like, we won.
yes, MTV has died.
Yes, we won. Yeah, but very good point indeed. Drew, what would be your thoughts overall on the album?
Overall, I enjoyed it more than Brett. I think there's some cool stuff here, especially if you like that sort of 90s era sound, in my opinion. There's a lot of cool stuff. This, to me, is one of those albums. If you're going to an album to try to, sort of like I do when I listen to like jazz and stuff like that, go into it and sort of pick apart the musicianship on the record, this is not the record for you. Odd punk rock guy isn't the record for you to do that. But if you're looking for something, in my opinion, to like put on while you're doing some work, doing some research for something, or maybe something like while you're studying, if you're going to school, or like driving, stuff like that, stuff that you just need something solid and hooky that gets you through and like just sort of is there in the background. Like, this is really, really great stuff for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you
really
need,
solid.
If you need a cool like record of tunes to just like groove to, and you want to build your playlist on that, you should go ahead and throw that in there and see if it works out for you. Build your deck with this, see if it works out. It's like building a Hearthstone deck. Throw it in there, see if it works, and if it doesn't, you can just replace it with something else. But yes, back to you, Patrick. What would be your conclusive thoughts on the album overall?
For me, it's as much of this album, I like it musically because I love alt rock, especially this sort of side of it, sort of what came out of the late 80s and early 90s. Bands like the Pixies and Dinosaur Jr. and all that weird stuff. But this is, for me, it's proof that you just, like, you can get old, but you don't have to give up. And I think that just for me, and it's sort of the message of the record, and also just the fact that he released an album after this, and it's also good. It's, right up this alley. That you can keep doing what you love, kind of, eternally if you let yourself. And I don't know. I have this whole like I don't want to grow up sort of attitude, and Bob Mould is a kid. Yes, because I am a Toys R Us kid, I say with a pile of Hot Wheels on my desk. It is just sort of like, a friendly reminder that you can be an old man, but you can still rock the fuck out.
Mm-hmm. Very good point indeed. Those are our thoughts on the album. Now we get to our main event of the evening. We get to our haiku reviews. Let's start with Drew. Drew, what is your haiku?
I try to stay clear of parts of bands I enjoy. Maybe I shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Brett, what is your haiku?
Don't let me stop you. Rock into your golden years as long as you can.
Mm-hmm. My haiku, grungy guitar work. Many songs worked pretty well. It was kind of cool. And Patrick, what is your haiku?
A living legend, kicking ass after 50, rock and roll hero.
Mm-hmm. And those are our thoughts on the record, on Bob Mould's Silver Age. You can, of course, find this on the Spotify playlist, so you can play Record Breakers the home game. Like we said before, nobody's given us ideas. Well, you can curate a playlist anywhere else, or you can curate your own. Anywhere you want. Just let us know. We'll try to do it for you. But go ahead and check it out on the Spotify playlist. On that Spotify playlist will be next week's record, and that will be provided by none other than Brett. Brett, what do you got for us next week?
We're going to something a little bit more, a little more complex than this album, but I wonder if there'll be any similarities that are drawn. We're gonna find a guy who, the man who has been nominated for more different Grammy Awards than anyone else in history, and his band Bela Fleck and the Flecktones in their self-titled album Bela Fleck and the Flecktones.
Yeah. Funny how that works.
Trigger alert.
What?
There will be banjo.
Mm-hmm. Banjo. Yeehaw.
Not that kind of banjo.
Oh. Okay. But that being said, be sure to play along and listen to it along with us so you can form your own opinions and see how they match up with ours. But that's next week, and this is this week. That's the end of another fantastic episode of Record Breakers. Of course, you can find us all over the internet. Patrick is at The Swagger. Brett is at Hibbity Bibbard, HIBBITYBIBBARD. Drew is at XJuicer4X. I'm at PD Rave. The show's at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers on the internet. RecordBreakersPodcast.com, RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Send us emails. If we ever get an email, we'll certainly read it on an episode. There might be some time delay, just because, well, recording and stuff. But send us one anyways. Give us your opinions. Give us reviews on iTunes, on Stitcher. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know how much you like us or don't like us. Give us all of your opinions. But that's it. Subscribe, share, like. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Want a goose?
Toodaloo. This thing's hot.